Hi there, my name's Vince from mymatevince.com, and in this video today I'm going to show you how you can get HDR even on the PlayStation VR first generation. So the problem with this, although it all works great, is that it doesn't allow HDR pass through. HDR is high dynamic range, so basically if you have a 4K TV, then a lot of the newer ones have HDR, so it makes things more colourful, more vibrant. The blacks are blacker, the whites are whiter. But unfortunately, when you're using the PSVR, it doesn't allow you to use HDR. So if we have a look on screen, I'm just going to show you because you're going to need to know this setting when we do the various things in this video. I'm going to show you various ways of fixing it, going from simply unplugging cables to using couplers and also then using not one but two HDMI switches. And then we will allow our setup to have HDR even though we're still using the version 1 PlayStation VR. Now, the version 2 that's coming out quite soon after this video is made is going to allow HDR pass through, but there's still loads of these that have been sold and it's not worth buying a new one, spending all that money just for the sake of HDR. So in this video I'm going to show you different ways that you can still achieve HDR. Now, what we want to do is we want to go up to settings and we want to go down to sound and screen. Now if you have a look here, if I go to video output settings and if I go down to video output information, you can see that we have got 4K here at 60 Hz, which is 60 frames per second, but it says HDR not supported. So what do PlayStation recommend for you to sort this out? Well, what they say is simply to unplug the cables. So if we go down to the processor unit down here, so what they recommend you do is simply get the cable, unplug it from the processor unit, and then plug it in to the PlayStation. Or you can get the cable from the PlayStation and then unplug it from the processor unit and plug it into the TV. And now, if we have a look, you can see that HDR supported. So the HDR's gone onto it now. Okay, so I'm going to show you the coupler technique now. So we're back to normal with the PSVR working like it should do. So let me just prove that it is working. So if I turn that one on there, it's going to be very hard to film here, but if you have a look right in there, you can now see the PlayStation on there. So I'm just going to leave that down. But the problem is, if you have a look up on screen here, again, we've gone to HDR not supported. So I'm going to show you now the coupler technique, which is better because you're not going to get wear on your HDMI ports on the TV or the PlayStation, but you will still get wear on these ports here. But to me, I'd rather have my processor unit fail than my PlayStation Pro or my TV because they're both more expensive items. So this is just really simple to do. Now, whenever you're mucking about with putting in and out HDMI cables, always have everything powered down because there is a chance that you can blow the HDMI port. It's slim, but it can happen. For this video, I'm doing everything live just to quicken things up. But when you're doing this yourself, always power it down. So what I would recommend is when you're using your PlayStation VR like this, have this set up. Then when you know you're playing a HDR video or a HDR game, then all you've got to do is unplug these two leads at the back here and get a simple female to female HDMI coupler, plug it in there and in there. And then what you've done is you've bypassed this completely. So all that's happening is the cable's coming out of the PlayStation and going straight into the TV. And now if I was to go back, already you can see HDR supported. And if I go back, so I've set it to automatic. Now if I go down to video output information, you will now see again 4K 60 Hz and it says HDR supported. So that's obviously a very simple way. Now I'm going to show you a way where you don't have to unplug any ports because a lot of people might not want to keep pulling cables out the back of this. A, because you might damage it, and secondly, again, this might be tucked away somewhere, so it might not be easy to get to. Right, okay, so let me show you this setup now with this one here. So basically what this one does is it allows you to choose between HDR and the VR headset depending on what you want to watch. So let's say for example now that we don't want to play with the VR headset, that we just want to play a HDR game like Horizon Zero Dawn. So what we've got is, we've got our HDMI cable coming out of the back of the PlayStation. It goes into the switch here. Now with this switch, the reason I've got this one is it's bi-directional and It's not as clever as other switches. Really, by pressing this button, going from one to another, all it's doing is allowing this cable to go through this side or this cable to go through this side. Then, if we just want to do the HDR, the black cable is then connecting to this black cable because that's where the light is on, and then it just goes up and it goes into HDMI 1 on this TV. So at the back of this TV, I've got a couple of HDMI ports, we've got 1 and 2. So to do this setup, you do have to have a spare HDMI port. So basically, all we have is going straight through into the TV when we want to watch HDR. And if you have a look up here, just to show you that HDR is working, if I go down again to sound and screen, video output settings, it's on automatic, and if I go to video output information, you can see 4K, 60 Hz, RGB and HDR supported. So it is using HDR when it's straight through there. When you do this, often you will have to reset your PlayStation. So like I said earlier, do it all when it's dead, and then when you go to turn it on, it will automatically come up with HDR. If you do it while it's live, then often you have to turn off your PlayStation anyway because it's already done that handshake to determine whether it can do HDR or not. Right, okay, so that's fine if we want to do HDR. Now let's say if we want to use the VR headset. What we're going to have to do, again, we're now just going to have to turn off the PlayStation. So I'm going to go down to power and I'm going to go to turn off PS4. Just going to fast forward through this bit, but you've got to wait until it completely powers down. And now if we look down at this switch here, I am now going to change it from here to here. So I'm just going to tap the mechanical switch. Obviously you would put a little label here saying HDR and PSVR so you know what's what. So I know when the switch is low, it's on number 1, and I know when it's high, it's on number 2. It's hard to see on the camera, but there is a difference there. You can see it goes up about 1 millimeter. So right now I've got it on number 2. So what's going to happen is the black cable is coming out, the HDMI is coming out of the PlayStation Pro, it goes into here. This time it's going down my white HDMI cable, which is going to the HDMI PS4 into this processor here. I then have the HDMI TV cable going out into the other port of the TV. So we will have to change HDMI inputs because normally I'm on HDMI 1, but now I'm going to HDMI 2. Now on this TV, only HDR works on HDMI 1, which is fine because that's where I've got HDR going to. This one here, it doesn't make a difference because it's not HDR enabled anyway. So this is going to be my PSVR. So I have to go to HDMI input 2 when I want to use the PSVR headset. So let me just show you that working now. So I'm just going to fast forward through this bit. I'm just turning on the PlayStation again. And if you have a look at the switch now, you can see that it's now lit up on number 2 because we've physically done the button to make it go down number 2. Up to settings, you will now see that on this one, it's not allowing HDR. So there you go, HDR not supported. Okay, so it's still 4K, but it's not supported. But now, if we turn on our headset here, you will now see in a couple of seconds that will come on in there. There you go. Yeah, so that's the headset working there. Right, okay, so although it does seem like a complete headache, it is actually very straightforward because all we have to do is, when we want to play on the PlayStation VR, all we have to do is put it to number 2 and then put it to HDMI 2 or whatever input you have it in. Then when you want to go onto a HDR game, all we have to do is put it to number 1 and then go to HDMI 1. And that way we don't have to plug or unplug any cables. It's all very straightforward. Okay, so this is the final one now and the most complicated one. So by doing this setup here, it's going to allow you to have HDR on this all down the one HDMI input on the TV. So if we have a look at the back of the TV here, you can see I've just got the one white cable going into HDMI 1, which is my HDR input on this TV. The other HDMIs are completely empty. So, how have we done it? This is what happens. If we look real closely, we've got the white cable coming out of the PlayStation 4 Pro. So this is a HDMI cable that comes out and it goes into this switch here. Then on this switch, I've got it set so it's on number 1 at the moment. So this is going to be the one that's going to allow HDR. So I could write HDR here and PSVR here so I know which one is what. Then from here, again, it carries on down the white cable and it goes into another switch. But this time the switch is back to front because this is bi-directional. It will work both ways. Most switches that you get will only work one way. So again, we've got it selected to number 1. So from here, the white cable goes through to this white cable, which goes in to the TV. So what I've done is I've put all the good quality cables on the HDR side. So the white cable comes out of the PlayStation, it goes into here. This switch then allows it to connect up to this white cable, which goes into this switch, which allows it to connect up to the white cable that goes into the input. So now that will work with HDR on the TV. But when you do it, it's going to say no input. And that's because at the moment, your PlayStation is set to automatic. And although it will allow HDR, it's not going to allow the automatic setting because it's going to try to put it on RGB. And it won't work on RGB. It will only work on, it will work on 4K HDR, but only with the YUV 420. It won't even work on YUV 422, which is the default. When it's set to RGB, it will then default to 422. It's only going to work on 420. Not a problem for me because it's only an 8-bit panel anyway. But as you can see, I haven't got an input. So this is where you have to start your PlayStation in safe boot mode. So you can start on a lower resolution like 720 or 1080p. So you can change it off automatic or off RGB and put it to 4K YUV. So have a look down here. This is all you're going to have to do. Go to the power button. You're not going to cause any damage. Just press it and hold it down until it beeps twice. So here we go. Once. Twice. Now let it fully close down. So I'm going to just fast forward through this, but you've got to wait until this light goes out. It's going to take about 10 or 15 seconds. And now that's fully gone out, we need to start it in safe mode. Again, we're going to hold it down until you hear 2 beeps. So press the power button and keep it held until the second beep. 1 beep. 2 beeps, and then let go. Now what you're going to have to find is you're going to have to find your charging cable from your controller, because if you have a look up here, it says connect the DualShock 4 using a USB cable and press the PlayStation button. So if we have a look down here, I'm just going to plug in my USB cable. I'm going to plug it in to the controller here, and now I'm going to hit the PlayStation button. And if you have a look at the second one there, it says change resolution. You have to use the D-pad, not the analog stick. So I'm going to go down to change resolution and I'm going to press X. And now it says the PS4 will restart. After it was restarted, select the video output resolution. So press X. Remember, you're only going to have to do this the once. You won't have to keep doing it. This is just while setting it up. So when you're trying to get HDR through the PlayStation VR, it is a headache. You are going to have to allow yourself quite a bit of time to swap around the cables and to do all this. But once it's set up, it will just work. Right, so now I need to press the PlayStation button again. And now I can move it up and down to what I want to go to. So I'm just going to start it in 1080p just to make sure that I do get a picture. Okay, now this is important. We now have to go up to settings and you have to actually take it off automatic, because I think what's happening is the PlayStation 4 Pro is recognizing that the TV is HDR and it's trying to put it through as RGB. But with all the jumble of cables we got down there, in my setup, I cannot get it to work on RGB, so I have to take it off automatic. So what I'm going to do is go down to sound and screen, then I'm going to go to video output settings, and this time it says resolution. I'm going to change it. Although it says RGB here, if I click on RGB, it's going to go blank, and then I'm going to have to do the hard reset again. So I'm going to have to hold down the power button again for 2 beeps and turn it on in safe mode again. Don't put it on automatic and don't put it on RGB. Keep it on this one here, YUV 420. And now it will go blank, and now it's going to come back on again. And if we go down to video output information, you will now see HDR supported, and it is 4K 60Hz YUV 420. So it's going to be a slight downgrade. You are never going to get out of a PlayStation 4 Pro 4K at RGB. It's not going to happen because it's only a HDMI 2 port and there's not enough bandwidth to have 4K full RGB, which is 444. Here we've got 420. If you just had the way PlayStation recommend, where you just plug the cable straight from the PlayStation Pro into here, it will say 420 or it will say RGB, but we'll start playing a HDR video or a game, go back to this setting and you will see it won't be RGB, it will be YUV 422. For me, it makes no difference because I've only got an 8-bit panel. The TV cannot do 10-bit. Now, you might well be able to have this setting here. So if I go back on, you might well be able to put it all the way to RGB like you would normally have. If, for example, you use shorter cables or different switches or better quality cables. I've just used cables that I've had lying around the house, and although they're good quality, they're old. This cable here came out about 4 or 5 years ago. So if you shorten the cables and get premium HDMI cables, you might well find that it will go to RGB, even though you're not going to get RGB on HDR, but you will get YUV 422. So anyway, there you can see that it is now definitely working via the processor unit and on HDR, because it says so here, HDR supported. Now let's say now if I want to use the headset, I don't have to change anything on the TV because we're still on the same input, but what I will have to do is, so pretend now I want to play, you know, Rigs, or I want to play Drive Club VR or something. All I've got to do is shut it down completely, and then when I turn it back on, just beforehand, I'm just going to change these both to number 2, and you will see the picture come up here. So if I was to turn this on now, it's just going to say, please connect your VR headset, because we've bypassed it at the moment. So all I'm going to do is, I'm going to hold this down here, I'm going to go to power, and I'm going to go to turn off PS4. And now when it's fully turned off, you can see my lights have gone off here. I'm going to hit both switches over to number 2. So that's one of them, that's the other one. And now what's happening is, I've got the white HDMI cable going into here. This time it's going down the black cable, which goes into the inputs, the HDMI PS4 in. Then I've got the HDMI TV, the black cable coming out, and it's going into this switch here. And now I've switched it so it's going down the white cable into the TV. So now if I turn on my PlayStation again, we can remove this cable now because we don't need to do that safe boot mode again. So now just turn it on. I'm going to let that boot up. And this time if you look up at the TV, now it will come up again. But this time it's not going to be HDR because we're going through the processor unit. Right, so first of all let me just show you that it's not HDR now. Settings, sound and screen, video output settings. You can already see it's taken it to off, video output information. And now you can see it's still 4K, but HDR not supported. And now let's turn on the headset, give it 30 seconds, and we should see the picture will come up on here. Right, so now if we have a close look there, again, you can see it's working there now. And then once we're finished with this and we want to go back to HDR, we just power everything down. So I'm just going to quickly show you that now because obviously it wasn't working before, we had to go through safe mode. So right now we're finished with the headset, so I'm going to turn it off. And I'm going to power down the PS4. The green lights will go off now because it's just turned off. I'm going to hit the switch over to number 1 and number 1, so now it should be on HDR. And now I'm going to power it back on again. So you can see now it's working without going into safe mode. So you only have to go through that hassle once. And there you go, HDR supported. 4K, YUV 420. So as you can see, it is a little bit of hassle getting it set up to begin with, but once it's set up, then it's just a case of hitting the 2 switches. So obviously, the easiest thing by far, in my opinion, is just to use the little coupler. Because it's so easy to use, you just unplug both cables, put it into either side, and it's job done. So there you go. So it is good news because as time moves on and more people get 4K HDR TVs, at least you can still use the original PlayStation VR processor unit. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and please subscribe for more how-to videos. Take care. Bye now.